Maestro Semyon Bychkov, welcome to the Digital Concert Hall. Welcome back, I should say. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. We've had a great week with you with English music, Walton, which was a personal favorite of mine, and Berio, Schubert. And I must say, I really enjoyed the way you gave us some personal insight into this Berio Schubert piece, or should we call it Schubert Berio? It means a lot to learn these things, and you had a very personal relationship with Berio and this piece, I believe.
Well, I was fortunate to have him in my life for as long as he was in this world, and for as long as I have known him, which is many years, in fact. It was a really extraordinary friendship. It was the man for whom I continue to carry enormous affection. I have met him, in fact, through my wife and her sister Katja and Mariella Beck. They have been great friends with Luciano ever since they went to hear him conduct his Symphonia, the premiere of it in Paris. And he was conducting it. They were so completely blown away by that music. They went to see him afterwards in his dressing room, and they said, "Maestro Berio, we are sisters, and we are studying piano at the Conservatoire, and we want you to write a concerto for two pianos for us."
Quite cheeky for two young
It was
students.
unbelievably courageous, but I guess, at that age, if you believe in something, you have no inhibitions. And so they just asked for it, and he looked at them and he melted. And he wrote the concerto. And so ever since, there's been a tremendous friendship, which was also extended to their mother, who was herself Italian, and from Torre del Lago, in a family whose house was next to Puccini's. And so, of course, there was this extraordinary Italian connection between them. He adored their mother, and he adored them. And so it sort of extended to me once I've met Marielle. And the beginning of that friendship was very rocky, because I flew to Cleveland to hear them perform the double concerto with him conducting. And after the concert, we went to a bar, four of us, and started talking. And before long, we were arguing about politics, because he was a member of the Communist Party in Italy, and I was an auntie, because I lived it. And so there was a rather heated exchange between us, and every time I would ask him questions whether he had read this from Marx, or that from Lenin, or this from Stalin, etc. Of course, he had no notion of that. It was of no interest to him. He was an idealist. And so eventually I said to him, well, if you don't know, you haven't read it, means you don't know what you're talking about it. And I have lived it. And so from that moment on, he surrendered. And it was a really beginning of the most beautiful friendship. And in a way, I can say that he's one of those people who have opened the door for me to the music of our time. Because the way he spoke about it, it was on such a, in such a complex, intellectually complex way, but also with the kind of simplicity that anyone could relate to and understand. And suddenly, listening to him speak about the character of music, all those symbols, notes, which we all know so well, sometimes are very difficult to decipher, they came to life, because they were part of life. They came from life itself, and they became life when he was describing them, or in fact producing them. And so one day, some years later, he came to see us in London. He was working there at the same time as we were, and we had dinner, and it was, as always, absolutely wonderful. And he was so full of life. He was an extraordinarily joyful person with great sensitivity and a great tenderness for people he loved.
He sometimes gave musicians a hard time. I worked with him once,
Yes,
and he terrified us.
He could be terrifying when it came to music, yes. Specifically performing music, interpreting it at the moment, because he wanted to hear what he wanted to hear, yes. And there was no two ways about it. But that was never in a personal sense. It was always just a devotion to the cause, but in an atmosphere of friendship, and in a social environment, and having dinner, and joking and laughing like crazy, because he adored anecdotes. And so it was a magnificent evening, as it always was with him. And then he was about to take his leave. It was getting quite late. And suddenly he says to me, do you feel like coming with me, because I have something to show you? I said, of course, Luciano. We take a taxi, we go to the flat that he was renting from Placido Domingo in Covent Garden, and go straight to the piano in the living room. And he produces two little sheets of paper that are very old. The paper is yellowish, basically. And he has tears in his eyes, and he says, you know, look at this. These are the sketches that Schubert began to compose 3 weeks before he died, which were to be his 10th symphony.
How did he get them?
He was given them by Universal Edition, that was also his publishing house, and asked to see if he would want to do something with it. And so he started working on it, and it eventually became a piece which he called Rendering.
Now, this word rendering, I had to look it up because even though it's an English word, it seems to be a computer word of creating an image out of sort of sketches, something like that.
And that is, in fact, the way he describes it. It is like a restoration of old fresco, where you try to restore the colors, but you do not try to gloss over the certain defects that are caused by the time.
That makes it beautiful.
That makes it beautiful, exactly. And so he eventually created this three-movement symphony, if you will, which is based on those sketches. The sketches themselves represent just a bass and a melodic line.
How much was actually there on the sketches? Just tiny ideas
Let's say,
harmonies?
No, in fact, sometimes harmony, sometimes it's just a bass line and a melodic line running on two staffs of musical sheet, and it can last for, let's say, 30 bars, and then it's over, and then a next sketch comes. And so what Luciano has done, he has harmonized, orchestrated the sketches, and they sound really like Schubert.
Yeah, they do.
And the moment the sketch ends, the way he made it end, he makes it fade away and to blend into Berio. And what's very interesting is that Schubert comes out of this with all of his glory, and Berio is always on tiptoes, always shy, always mysterious, always from a distance.
It's true. It's in the orchestration you hear it as well, because the brass are all muted and there's all sorts of little things going on. It's sort of like, here's the great Schubert, but sorry, it's me, Berio, now.
Absolutely.
It's almost apologetic in a way.
Well, because Luciano was obsessed by music of great composers, by all great music, in fact. And what was beautiful about him is this kind of humility. Someone of his stature and his capacity to invent music, when you think of Symphonia, which for me is the sacre of Stravinsky that came
That's full of quotes as
55 years later, whatever. Once in a while, we live to witness something that changes our understanding about the subject, in this case, music. As Stravinsky did with Sacre, as Beethoven did with Eroica, Luciano has done it, for example, with Symphonia. And so to see this kind of almost this kind of humility in front of a composer that he worshipped. And that first time when he showed me those sketches, he said, think about it. Schubert had 5 years to live than Mozart. Now think how much Mozart created.
Schubert died age 31.
31, exactly.
Well, he would have had 5 more years.
He would have had 5 more years.
Mozart.
And when one thinks what Mozart had created in the final 5 years of his life,
this is true.
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
What do you think Schubert would have come up with?
I don't know. But what is very interesting is that when one hears this rendering, and one hears particularly certain things in the slow movement and the second movement, that it makes you see how he's reaching out to Mahler, which is 20th century.
True, yes.
And that makes you think that finally the way for a creator has to be found in order to go outside of his own time and go into eternity. And the only way to go into eternity is to create something that 100 years later will still feel as it belongs to its own time. And this is why this rendering is so extraordinary, because it comes from one man's look at the other man's creation and the other man's life. And that man lived 2 centuries ahead of Luciano, or let's say 1.5 centuries ahead of Luciano. And to see how they connect.
You said that there were in the three movements, you see three quotes, very important quotes of Schubert in there.
Yes. There are, of course, many things that Schubert had said, but three of them struck me as something that is so extraordinarily significant for us all. I wrote them down and I carry them with me since many years now. One of them he said when he was 15 or 16 years old. And he said, I still would like to do something in music, but what can one do after Beethoven? And of course, you understand, this young man, a teenager, living in the city of Vienna, where Beethoven is God. And Beethoven is creating something that is putting the world on its head, because nothing of that kind had been known before. And so this young Schubert, who is trying to find his way in life, trying to find his way in music. So it's clear why that would be an obsessive thought for him. And then some years later, when he was 27, no, not even 27, no, he was 25, he said, my musical works are a result of my knowledge and my pain.
It's quite a mixture.
Yes. And then the final thing that he uttered before he died, in fact, is a question.
The very final thing he uttered before he died?
Well, according to this historian, biographer, it was the final thing he said. He was brought home. He was at home, but not able to recognize his father, his brother, who were around him. He kept asking to be brought home, whereas in fact he was already at home. And he suddenly said, do I not deserve a place in this earth? And that I find absolutely extraordinary, somehow summation of what one feels about one's short life and, of course, a contemplation of what's to come.
And you feel that you feel this very strongly in rendering.
Yes, yes, because he's clearly trying to go away from Beethoven, beyond Beethoven, if you will. He's clearly expressing the pain that he has lived with for, I think, as long as he was able to remember himself. And the question whether or not doesn't he deserve a place in this world, of course, is a very, I suppose, a very logical question to ask for someone in his condition.
Yes. So Berio didn't finish the piece. He didn't reconstruct it. He added to it, didn't he? He sort of made the 10th Symphony in a way, but with his own personal touch. He'd done that with quite a few things.
Yes.
He liked to use the old quotes.
Because he loved music of others. Yes. He adored, for example, Mahler. So his Symphonia, the scherzo of the Symphonia, the third movement, is based on the scherzo of the Mahler Second Symphony, the Resurrection.
I heard you two had quite the argument about incorrect quotes. And you had to tell him to get his act together and get these quotes down properly, because he just thought he'd written down anything.
Luciano was a funny mixture of, on one hand, fanatically devoted to wanting to hear what he wanted to hear. On the other hand, always late. He was supposed to, he composed a piano concerto of Daniel Barenboim that Daniel premiered with Orchestre de Paris. And Daniel was receiving, literally, the days before the premiere, Daniel was still receiving by fax the latest bars of the concerto. You see, so it is that, and of course, when you are so late, then you are very careless, because you're just trying to survive, and so you're not going to be very meticulous about this little nuance.
But you made him put all the things in.
Because that's my job. If he wants to quote Sacre of Stravinsky specifically, then it has to be a specific quote of Stravinsky.
Of course.
You know? But all of that, of course, is in good humor.
And his own pieces, like tonight we have also the the sequenza. He wrote 14 sequenzas, I think. I was counting them. It's difficult to count them because some are 7B and they've all got different letters after them. This one tonight is Albrecht Meyer, our wonderful solo oboe player. He's playing the sequenza. I wish that there had been one for horn, and you could have asked him to do one for solo conductor. That would have been something. I wonder what he would have made of that.
Well, he would have laughed, and I'm absolutely sure he would have created something unbelievably funny and complex.
I wish he had. I would have liked to have seen you do it. So that's the Berio part of the evening, which has been really for us an incredible eye-opener, because you came to the rehearsals and you gave us your insight on this, and it's so valuable to have this personal insight. For me, it changed the way I saw the piece. You know, you come to a rehearsal, you see a bit of Schubert, a bit of Berio, but to hear all this was really wonderful. And then, in the second half, we have Walton, William Walton's Symphony No. 1, which as an English person, I was thrilled to see this on the program, because it's just not played very often. I know you've done it a few times. You told me yesterday that you actually discovered the second symphony first.
Yes, many years ago, I was looking into Walton's music, and I came across a work called the Oratorio Belshazzar's Feast, which I actually conducted at that time.
That's another one we should play here.
It is a very powerful piece. And at that time, I was quite fascinated by the Second Symphony, but I did not conduct it. I just didn't get around to it. And then years went by. I was doing other things. And then a few years ago, I said to myself, no, I must go back and investigate more of Walton. And so then I checked the First Symphony, and I said to myself, it's really extraordinarily fresh. It's so full of invention, of fantasy. It's a piece of a young man with young men's ambitions, aspirations, anguish, melancholy. Everything that we all live is in that piece. And then I looked at the Second Symphony, and suddenly Second Symphony that years ago was so attractive, suddenly it felt a little bit more conventional. And the first one, somehow, my impression was, tended to sparkle more.
Well, he was in the throes of love dramas, wasn't he, when he wrote it?
He certainly was. I mean, the second movement, which is a presto con malizia.
Malizia, we were wondering about the meaning of that.
Well, it's about maliciousness.
Yes.
And you see, he was deeply in love with the lady to whom he in fact dedicated the symphony. Well, she had left him for another person. And so that presto is not a scherzo, because scherzo basically means joke. This is no joke.
It's a malicious joke.
This is a very malicious joke.
Yes.
And the slow movement is full of anguish and nostalgia, melancholy, I would say. It's really a deeply, profoundly touching piece of music, whereas the first movement is full of drive and expectation of something that is in a way imminent to happen, and the last movement in a way is a summation. It's sort of a happy end.
The fourth movement I find terribly British. You hear, the Crown Imperial, and you hear all sorts of things in there. And
it's very endearing for those of us who are not Brits.
Yeah, I hope so. For me, there's not enough English music over here. I'd love to do more. We played it. The orchestra played this piece once, I think, in 1936, which is a very, very long time ago. So you basically had to teach us this new piece. It's not easy to teach an orchestra a new piece that they've really never played before. You have a lot of patience. It must be the fun part of it, though, when you bring a totally new work. I mean, in England, I know you've played this piece with the BBC recently, and for them, they maybe need one rehearsal, and they know it. We need more time. What is the difference for you of a German orchestra playing a British piece of music or an English? Can you say that even?
Yes, of course. There is a difference, because music is born in a specific place, from a specific individual. That person is the son of his country or a daughter of her country, and so it's coming from a specific culture. And culture is not only a way of life; it's a way of being. It's a way of body language. It's a way of expressing oneself. I think all human beings feel exactly the same. It's just that they will express themselves differently in different cultures. And so doing this music, for example, with the London Orchestra, one did not need to explain certain things because they are taken for granted.
They're just British.
It's wonderful. It makes it very easy. It makes it unbelievably difficult, because with such ease comes a danger of not asking the questions anymore. And it was not one day of rehearsal in London. It was, I think, 4 days of rehearsing.
Oh.
Yes, and it was literally taking the piece.
They must have wondered why on earth they had to rehearse this piece they know so well.
Once we started doing it, I think they realized that the piece actually has a great complexity and a lot richer than it can appear to be at the first hearing. Because the danger of this is to sound very brash, very at your face, and then it is fairly primitive, which is not at all what this piece of music, I believe, to be. And so this is the discovery, but the discovery for them was based essentially on knowing the music, but discovering it in the new light. Whereas doing it with an orchestra, for example, Berliner Philharmoniker, or before that I did it with in Cologne with WDR, I've done it in San Francisco, etc. Doing it with people who have no preconceived idea whatsoever, who are not necessarily coming from the British culture and the British upbringing and the English way of thinking and whatever. It is a rather different, in a way, it's just sort of going into a new venture without having any idea.
Do they play it differently?
Well, you know, in the end, a result is always relative. The effort is absolute.
Oh, I don't know. We quite like the result to be good
as
well.
We all do like the results, but the results are a combination of those efforts. And when you have a history of performing and living with a piece, whether you're an individual musician as myself or a collective being such an orchestra is, then of course those years of living with a piece allow one to be freer and express oneself. And I'm absolutely sure that what we will be performing in the first performance of this week will not be quite the same as it will be in the second or the third. This is a matter of life. That's what makes it so fascinating. What we do is the ability at once to discover something and after that live with it, if it's worthwhile living with. And so it was quite interesting with the Berliner Philharmoniker, discovering this music. It's also a responsibility because, you know, if you're doing Brahms Symphony, or which is what we did last time,
yes.
If you do that, you don't need to convince anyone of the greatness of the music. Whereas when you bring a work which is essentially unknown, a composer who to this day outside of United Kingdom has not found his place in the concert life,
except with the viola concerto, that's played
except
often.
With a few works like viola concerto, occasionally cello concerto or violin concerto, but basically has not found a regular place in the concert life, then there is a responsibility because you have to convince your colleagues that this music is necessary.
Well, you didn't have to convince me because I'm obviously British and I was thrilled to play this. I wasn't the only Brit who was thrilled that Walton was coming. We had a special visitor at the dress rehearsal, Sir Simon Rattle, our chief conductor.
Yes.
He had a morning off and he was so thrilled that the orchestra was playing Walton. He came in and listened to the rehearsal, but that's not all he did, is it?
Yes, he actually placed himself in the back row of the percussion and played the tom-tom.
He did.
At the end of the last movement. He did it brilliantly.
He did.
And he was fully concentrated.
Of course, he said he was terrified. No, it's really wonderful, and just to show, I mean, to see how great we all think it is. You see that the chief conductor comes in on his morning off. I mean, it's really, we're very happy that you brought Walton, and we're very, very happy you bring this personal experience with you of Berio and the Schubert, and it's been a wonderful week. So thank you very, very much for talking to us about it. Thank you.